Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Supreme Court of South Australia. For those who don't know me, my name is Evelyn. I'm the President of the South Australian Debating Association. I'm also the external wellbeing contact for your students this year, and I've been a coach of the state debating team for 4 years. So in particular, there are a number of students who've been on this team for a few years, and I've seen their development throughout that process, and it has been incredibly rewarding. So you should all be very proud of yourselves for the part you may have played in that development. I want to thank you all for coming, the parents, the friends, the family, our coaches, in particular, Her Honour Chief Justice Stein, who is the patron of the SADA, is attending today and will say a few words in a short moment. I just want to give you some information about this year's squad. So they went through a rigorous trialling process in November of last year. There were several rounds through to a top 18 round, a top 12 round before the 6 that you see before you became the squad that were going to go to nationals. As all of the parents who have been hanging around the Pentreath building 2 nights a week will know, the students train for 3.5 hours at a time on a Wednesday and a Sunday, and have done so since January this year, with even more extensive trainings over the school holidays. So it has been a very, very intensive process. They've all taken it in their stride and done exceptionally well. We would love to thank St. Peter's College for facilitating those trainings and continuing our partnership moving forward. I'd like to extend my thanks and congratulations to the coaches for preparing such a wonderful team this year. We have Flinders with us in person, and the other 3 coaches, Kyan, Devika and Max, unfortunately could not make it tonight, but have all put in an exceptional amount of effort. Thank you also to Colette, our media officer, who is attending today and also will be attending NSDC, which is the National Schools Debating Championships. And thank you to Nia Singhal, who also could not be here but will be in attendance at the championships to assist with supervision. All of the coaches have been on the team before, so they are very familiar with the high stakes, the high stress level, and they have handled that process exceptionally well. So thank you very much for all of your hard work. It is a very grueling process, and for which there is very little reward except to see the way that the kids develop. The students will depart this coming Sunday, Mother's Day, unfortunately, apologies to all the parents, for Brisbane early in the morning. They will debate 7 times in the in rounds. They'll debate against all of the states and territories that attend the national championships. The top 4 teams will then progress to finals, which will be held on the Friday and Saturday, and you'll see them back home in mid-morning on Sunday. I would just like to express a heartfelt thank you to the parents who nurtured a love of debating in these students, which is such an important skill, particularly in our modern world, for patiently waiting for them when we kept them late for training every single week, and to listening to their endless debriefs after the spars that we had over Zoom with other states and territories in the lead up to this tournament. I'd like to thank you to all of our teachers and educational professionals in the room for cultivating a love of debating within your schools. I really hope these students can go back to those schooling environments and participate, coach, teach, and make sure that that love of debating does continue. So thank you for your support tonight. But I'm now going to invite Her Honour to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to have accepted that invitation, and I was very delighted to accept the offer to continue as patron of the association, following on from the previous Chief Justice Kourakis. I never had the opportunity to debate. I went to a school a while ago where debating was not a thing. I have had the benefit of seeing my own children debate at high school level, and I can therefore talk of my own personal experience of the enormous advantages of engaging in debating. There are so many skills that young people learn in the course of debating, everything from time management, constructing a coherent, sensible, logical argument, having to engage in a range of topics and opinions on a variety of matters, the art of persuasion, which my children regularly attempted to use upon me, sometimes with greater and sometimes with less effect, but always good for your own parents, with your own siblings. And it was wonderful actually to see them develop in their own way, as Evelyn has just talked about all of the law development. This state has a very fine tradition of debating. I understand that South Australia holds the claim to the title of the first national champions of the inaugural National Schools Debating Championship, which was in 1971. And there are a whole host of amazing South Australians who have been debaters, including we have Premier John Bannon, formerly Premier John Bannon, Francis Nelson KC, who is the most senior member of the South Australian Bar, journalists Keith Conlon, Annabel Crabb, former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, and there's a host of former state team members who are now members of the bench, and some esteemed barristers, and I'm sure you know many of them. So I congratulate this year's team. Amazing. And I knew that there was a lot of work, but I didn't realise quite how much work there was until Evelyn set out your grueling schedule. It is an amazing achievement to have made it this far. It is also a wonderful indication of the support and acknowledgement and seriousness with which all of the supporters, be they friends, family, coaches, take to this, and that is a wonderful thing, and long may it continue. Irrespective of whether or not you succeed or fail at the end of the day, I hope you can remember it is going to be really hard work. It no doubt will be stressful, but please remember to stop and reflect. Remember to stop and reflect on what you did to get here and how well that reflects on you and your achievement to this point, and try and enjoy it, even if just a little, because despite all of this stress and the hard work, there will be amazing, even if it's just moments here and there, where you can be so proud of a point you've made, just working together collectively as a team, that experience of being there and having got that far, irrespective of what the final outcome is. Having said that, I do hope you bring home the trophy, and if you do, that would be amazing. But I wish you all the very best, and I hope you have a fantastic week.
Thank you very much, Your Honour, for your inspiring words that hopefully the team will take with them, especially when they are in 30 minutes into prep and don't know what their case will be against New South Wales. I'm going to introduce the team to you, and then we will get started on the debate. So from your left through to right, speaking first affirmative tonight, we have Harry Baholski. Harry is a year 11 from Prince Alfred College. He is the silent fourth on our speaking team this year. We next have Evie Gleghorn, who is a year 12 from St Ignatius College. She is a reserve this year, and tonight she will be speaking third affirmative. Next along, we have Gigi Osborne, who is our captain. She is year 12 from St Ignatius College. She will be speaking second and reply both tonight and in championships. Next along, we have Grace Collins, who is the longest standing member of the team, being her third year on the team. She is a year 12 from Loreto College. Tonight, she will be speaking third negative, and third is also her position on the speaking team for the championships. Next along, we have Ansh. He will be speaking first tonight and at the championships. He is a year 10 from Prince Alfred College. And finally, we have Bella Nguyen, who is year 11 from Wilderness. She is a reserve, and tonight she will be speaking second negative. Our topic for tonight is that, assuming we had the capacity, we would stop all development of artificial intelligence. I invite the first affirmative speaker, Harry Baholski, to begin the debate.
When choosing where humanity should drive our fate, we did not want AI behind the wheel. 3 things in this speech. Firstly, a substantive on the certain exacerbated harms of developing AI. Secondly, on why it poses an existential threat to humanity. And thirdly, why we get better AI usage in our world. But firstly, 5 points of setup. What is the existing trajectory of AI in the status quo? We see in the past it was limited in its capacity to help humans and was less powerful than it is now. AI photos were very distinguishable from non-AI media. There were major issues with functioning, and it was not taken seriously as beneficial to humanity. But in the present and more recently, we see a rapid expansion of AI in our world. Those errors still exist to some extent, but instead of a refining of past models, we actually see a focus on new, bigger, better models, such as, for example, Anthropic's Mythos model, which is extremely powerful and signifies that we are now at a tipping point when it comes to AI development, as it has been withheld from the public and governments having shown to bypass security systems that have been safe for decades. No, thank you. Secondly, on what is the existing market structure of AI? We see that it is a very competitive market, but it is controlled by a small group of extremely powerful companies, such as Anthropic, Meta, and OpenAI. Thirdly, on what the international implications of the AI race are. We see that governments, having seen the importance of AI, have been incentivized to invest heavily in it and discourage regulation. This is manifested in an arms race type competition between the US and China to dominate the AI market. No, thank you. Fourthly, what does stopping continued development look like? It looks like a halting of all industry creation of new AI technology. Note, by the topic of this debate, we have the fear to do this, and also by the topic of this debate, that halting the continued development of AI isn't necessarily important enough of an issue to be weighed into this debate. And fifthly, on what AI use we support. We support the continued use of AI models that are already widely used today. Yes, that means no thank you, that we incur some amount of bad AI use, but I will tell you in my third substantive on why this is better regulated, to the point that it is extremely mitigated. Firstly, on my substantive of certain harms of continued development being exacerbated. I tell you in setup that a lot of AI tech exists already, and that I'll take you in a moment, and that it has already proven to be able to improve the world. For example, being used in finding out how proteins fold to create cancer medication and vaccines. I'll take you now.
When you don't allow new startups to develop new AIs, do you not only entrench the current power imbalance in AI companies that exist?
We see that the power imbalance was necessarily not going to change in your world either, where these smaller companies were shut out by the extremely high barriers to entry into the oligopolistic AI market. Instead, we see that the power between these companies and other stakeholders like the government and population is likely to be better in our world, as I will expand on in my third substantive. We think that the continued development's benefits are extremely marginal. This is to say that existing AI has proven beneficial in certain domains, and can be even more so when these existing models are refined, better regulated, further implemented, and people's ability to utilize them improves over time. Therefore, the AI you get in opposition's world is focused mostly on high impact technology in domains it is not already prevalent in, for example, mass surveillance and warfare. We already co-opt so much of opposition's benefits. Now on the certain harms that they are exacerbating in their work. We see that workers are being replaced unfairly and inefficiently. Employers have been misled and are implementing AI with inherent flaws. No, thank you. Believing that it is more efficient than existing workers. But it is being poorly implemented, and the remaining workers are having this AI implemented without training, and therefore it is not actually seeing the economic benefits that are being promised. It does not have good enough checks and balances to oversee how it works and is implemented. For example, this looks like AI use in out-of-the-loop warfare, where humans are not involved in decision making. So on a second exacerbated harm, like we've seen with AI's trajectory, things like Grok's 23,000, no thank you, images of exposed children are becoming more prevalent and less indistinguishable from non-AI media. The impacts of this are twofold. Firstly, corporations unfairly and inefficiently lay off workers when tricked into poorly implementing bad technology. This leads to unemployment and harm to the economy. And secondly, AI AI continued development is going to extend to the point where reality is indistinguishable from AI media. This looks like issues with our legal systems. This looks like exploitation of people through deepfakes and interference with our very democracy as an objective reality becomes questionable. I'll take a POI now. Yeah.
Do you stand by the existing use of autonomous weapons systems that are for example, the ones that have been employed in Iran?
As I've said, we support the use of AI systems that are widespread. Existing AI models that are widespread. This may, for example, include use of AI in defense systems. However, we know that this is likely to be more humane and better regulated in a world where you do not have the arms race type competition of AI that you get in their world. I will explain further why we get better regulations later on. On my second substantive of why you get existential threats resulting from AI. Firstly, on why firms are incentivized to develop AI that poses these threats to humanity. Firstly, governments push them to do so. For example, see this arms race between the US and China in order to become militarily dominant. Secondly, high impact technology makes the most profit. Investors are often large companies and governments that want the most large and significant changes. Thirdly, firms are incentivized to do this due to competition. We tell you in setup that the market in AI is extremely competitive. Therefore, companies aim for shock technology that gains them the most market share. For example, Mythos. Of the harms of existential threats, what do the harms of existential threats look like? Governments, people, and firms all cannot plan for this. The development is by nature unpredictable. Corporations are incentivized to experiment until new models are created, even when these are harmful. And humans are inherently bad at planning and short-sighted, meaning we are unable to predict some of these future harms. Examples of what these existential threats may look like include mass surveillance or autonomous warfare becoming rife where it is unregulated. The conclusion is that AI is developing exponentially and will do so until the point that we see what we see in movies coming to reality. And lastly, on how AI use improves in our world. The premise of this point is that AI can be better when it is regulated as opposed to when it is not in their world. AI regulations don't currently exist because AI develops at a pace that outpaces legislation. And secondly, the technical knowledge is concentrated within firms. In our world, the AI is now constant, so governments can catch up, and there is more political capital as governments that were previously distracted on, for example, the arms race or other harms of AI can now deal with the smaller issues, for example, deepfakes. And thirdly, there is more social capital as people now see that the development of AI has been halted. It is not going to result. They're not going to be caught up on the possible benefits of it in the future. Resultingly, governments are able to catch up AI, and AI is less able to outmaneuver legislation as its capacity is limited. Hence, we protect humanity. We were the side who stopped an existential threat. Thank you.
I call the first negative speaker Ansh.
Panel, I think opposition may put on some glasses because they're acting incredibly short-sighted. They do not get word data usage, they do not get any development, they do not get any impact. 3 points in the speech then. First, on framing. Second, on who better engages with opportunity cost. And third, who gets better democratization of access. Noting, a lot of my substantive in this speech is directly responsive to what we hear from Harry. First then, on setup. What do we actually think AI actually looks like in the status quo? We thought it looks like a few things. First, there is incredibly large reliance on it as is, because it is incredibly useful to things like medicine, healthcare, and engineering, especially because it plays such a vital role in the development of infrastructure and technological advancement. We thought there were two very broad characterizations as to what AI actually looks like. The first is narrow AI. We thought this was the most important because it cannot think outside of the task it is trained to do, but it is meant to be incredibly detrimentally important to the task that it does actually do. These are the most heavily integrated in society. These are the most important and the ones that we are happy to prioritize, no thank you, on-side opposition. Second, we thought there was generative AI. This looks like ChatGPT, Grok, and Meta AI, which is open to the public. That is, there was a wider variety of access. I explain why this is important in my second substantive. Second, what do we think the development of AI actually looks like? It looks like a couple of things. First, it is constantly ongoing and maintained. That is to say, A, in terms of narrow AI, it is diffused across several companies. That is to say that there is an incredibly large base of companies that have the ability to opt in, that have the ability to develop, such that we are able to get better technological advancement. No, thank you. Second, we tell you that generative AI looks like development and release is maintained. This looks like the very large majority of companies, such as Meta AI, such as OpenAI, ChatGPT, constantly outputting new models that are probably locked behind a paywall, but the worse models that looks like ChatGPT 4.0 or 4.5 no longer have a paywall. This means you just simply get a larger variety of access. I'll take you.
What makes regulation more likely in a world where governments are extremely likely to want to be the only ones to access autonomous weapons?
Okay, but I think the perfect response to this is when Claude AI or Anthropic directly opposed for the use of AI within the Pentagon. Reason being was they didn't want to opt in to having the systems used for autonomous weapon systems. I still think companies hold some semblance of ethics. They realize that there is some ethics behind using autonomous weapons. I don't think this stands. Third, then, on who uses AI and why, a couple of responses, two broad things. First, we thought the most broad use of AI was OpenAI, this looks like generative AI. These were the most visible, but we didn't think these were necessarily the most important. Reason being, we tell you that there is narrow AI that is the most ingrained in society, that actually holds the most value and the most purpose. Why? Let's move on to the point, therefore, of opportunity cost. Note the setup regarding how useful and integrated AI currently is, both economically and socially. That is, AI itself is inherently useful for doing several tasks outside of human ability. This allows for technological and ecological progression, such that we as humans, we cannot do things, such as we cannot necessarily analyze cancer cells in the same way that AI can do so. We tell you this looks like AlphaFold being able to, no thank you, analyze proteins to be able to counteract cancer cells so much earlier. This was just so much more vital and important than anything that a proposition could actually bring up. We were able to weigh this on such a high level of severity. Because we tell you that, no thank you, we actually engage with the most vulnerable populations here, the people that actually rely on AI to be able to sustain their own lives. Therefore, when you curb the development of AI, we tell you you curb the ability for humans to be able to use this in both their economies, in social and well-being and welfare. What does this therefore mean? You are able to improve the health of everybody under side negative when you are able to garner more on the development of this AI itself. Because you are able to increase the capacity that it had to do these levels of analysis, to do these levels, no thank you, of major economic, to do these levels of major healthcare, economic and engineering analysis, in which you are able to rely on these systems to encourage more and better societal development. We tell you this is so important because you are able to therefore better impact these vulnerable populations. The impacts here were threefold. First, you just got better general usage of AI. Second, we employed it to severity on these vulnerable populations. Third, we were able to utilize these technologies for progression that minimize the environmental impacts that side proposition are going to try and give you in this debate. And second, the social impacts that we tell you it is so useful and so deeply ingrained in society. We thought that this was the tipping point in our unique path to victory, that we actually help vulnerable populations. This was something that Affirmative just simply couldn't contend with in this debate. This is why we weigh this so very highly. I'll take a POI if you have one.
Mythos is not the rule, it's the exception. The reason why they're not releasing their model to the public is so that other people can't have access to their technology. It's not for some ethical reason.
Okay, but I think this in of itself still means that some companies do have the incentive to do the same thing. Even if this isn't true, I still tell you, it is probably better that you get regulation under side negative. Because over the long term, if you are able to do more development, you are able to better put in safeguards, you are able to analyze why your AI went on a terrible tangent. I thought this was better when you were able to analyze this a lot more in depth, when you didn't put restrictions on the type of development you got, when you had things like Mythos still existing to a much larger scale under side Affirmative. Okay, second then on the democratization of access, a couple of things here. First, we tell you that AI generation is obviously so incredibly important. That is because it had a wide variety of access to the internet, a wide variety of the access to the information at hand that some people just necessarily didn't. The reason being, because if you are a part of a rural community, even if you had internet access and you didn't have access to AI, you couldn't necessarily contend with the people who were so incredibly privileged to have libraries, to be able to go behind the paywalls of things like the Advertiser, the Economist, that obviously I am personally probably a lot more privileged to be able to do, but there are some people out there that simply could not. If you had an internet connection, you were simply able to engage a lot more with the AI that you had at your fingertips. Know what we tell you before about the paywall system, because as companies want to develop more and better AI, the AIs that are worse simply go out of the paywall. This meant that you as an individual now had better access to information, you had better access to AI that was going to give you better, more reliable information, given its capacities were now increasing. Why was this therefore just so incredibly important? It meant that I as an individual therefore had better access to information. I was able to increase my widespread variety of knowledge. It meant that I was able to contend with the individuals who had so much more privilege than me. We tell you that at the very fact that AI is also now globalized, this variety of impact was going to increase tenfold under side a negative than it was under side affirmative. No thank you. We tell you that at the point at which you get this spread usage, you are able to allow smaller startups to actually engage with the platform. We know this looks like us actually having a barrier to entry, even if it was so incredibly high. Side affirmative don't have a barrier to entry at all. I think they locked companies out of this debate. We give you this in a POI at Grace. I didn't think the response was actually sufficient. We tell you, therefore, at the end of this debate panel, that affirmative lacked the way of getting people to access information, they lacked the way of people being able to access better healthcare. We tell you this was the tipping point in this debate, to the point at which we tell you negative did win this debate. Thank you.
I call the second affirmative Gigi.
The problem with opposition's case in this debate is that we already do the majority of the things that they can do. We already enable all of these benefits to healthcare. We already enable all of these benefits to students through education, through enabling more access to things that we otherwise couldn't, like in the status quo. What they do is they produce more models like Mythos, which literally have the power to pose existential threats to our world. This is extremely detrimental. This was an impact that they could not escape in this debate. Firstly, on what opposition can do in this debate. Secondly, on companies. Thirdly, on democratization of AI. And then fourthly, on mitigating environmental impacts. What do they tell you? They tell you that they will prioritize building of narrow AI. Problem with this is that this is not a model debate. You cannot fear that in. More countries are more likely to focus it on building like more generative AI and new models that can uniquely help them. We tell you at Harry that they're more likely to focus on things that are going to give them a unique benefit in what we tell you is an existing arms race in the world. This looks like US prioritizing models like Anthropic. They're currently trying to integrate Mythos into the Pentagon. This is something happening in the status quo. We tell you it happens more in opposition's world. Okay, secondly, they tell you that there are already existing harmful technologies in our world. Two responses. Firstly, they don't bother trying to fix this. They simply aspire to add on to these technologies. That makes this a symmetrical harm that both sides have to cop, that they are just existing bad AI. But secondly, we tell you at first that we encourage better regulation, and we give you 4 mechanisms for this, each of which goes unresponded to in this debate. I need a response at second. Okay, secondly then, on companies. They tell you a few things. Firstly, they tell you that companies hold some semblance of ethics. I think that this is an extremely problematic way to take this debate. If you're relying on the idea that companies have ethics, that is a very low bar. 3 responses. Firstly, this is simply not true. I tell you in a POI that one of the main reasons why Anthropic does not want to release its Mythos model is literally for a standard corporate incentive, which is not wanting anybody to use a similar model. It is not for what they are telling you that this model is too powerful to release to the public. Secondly, even if that's not true, they still have to weigh up this ethical trade-off against the objective financial benefits of going and producing these things. I think that most companies, no thank you, are going to choose the financial benefit. And thirdly, the sunk cost fallacy just exists because you're just more likely, if you're in a position where you've sunk so much money into producing this AI model, to continue to want to actually produce that AI model, to want people to use it, to want people to benefit from it. You're more likely to want to enact that in your world. Mythos is not the rule, it's the exception. Okay. Secondly then, they tell you that there exists a power imbalance in AI companies in the market, and we exacerbate this. We keep the same groups dominating this. Firstly, hardware for AI companies is extremely expensive. Companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are facing this in the status quo. This means that startups are already locked out of the market. Opposition doesn't do anything to fix that. So the power imbalance still exists in your world. Secondly, this power imbalance is actually exacerbated in your world because AI companies are incentivized to lock others out of the market for their extremely profitable and uniquely developed models. Again, go back to Mythos. This means that they don't share any technology, and since it's concentrated in corporations' hands, none of the startups ever get access to this. This erodes all of their democratization of AI point, but I'll deal with it again later. Okay, lastly, no thank you. They give you a slight push on regulation and safeguards, but we give you a whole substantive point on this, and we tell you that this is the most important thing in this debate, that currently there is unregulated use of AI in their world that simply continues. That is the most important harm that they have to cop. Okay, why can you not put safeguards in while you're still developing, which is something that they try to assume that you can? The truth is that you simply don't know what safeguards to put, because if you're still developing an AI model, how are you ever supposed to know what regulations or what safeguards to imbue on your model if you literally don't know what your model can do? And this is the competitive edge that most of these companies get, is that when they are just trying random things, which is what I'll talk about in my substantive, they're just trying random things. They're using this trial and error process to try and get the most optimal outcome. They're just more likely to not want to A, not want to put these safeguards in the first place, but B, even if they can do so, that don't have the ability to. Even if they want to, they don't have the ability to, because they simply don't know what their AI model can do, and that is actually what makes it competitive. Okay, lastly then on the democratization of AI, before I'll take a point.
Do we know what ChatGPT 4.5, which currently exists and is currently incredibly widely used, can do?
Yes, we know what ChatGPT can do, but that is not the harm of this debate. Opposition is wanting us to stop ChatGPT from happening, but A, that is not their burden, and B, they don't stop that either. The problem is in this debate is with more bigger existential threats. Nobody is changing anything on ChatGPT except us, because we literally give you a whole substantive push of 4 mechanisms as to why we increase regulation. Nobody is doing that except for us, but even if it's true, they still have that on their side. That is still a harm that they have to deal with. Okay, lastly then on the democratization of AI, they tell you that this makes it more likely that everybody can access AI. 3 responses. Firstly, most companies literally don't have a paywall already, or at least the ones that are going to make the biggest difference to the most number of people. This is to say that you can very easily access ChatGPT, access DeepSeek, access those basic models that are going to make big differences to your lives. Secondly, I don't understand why this is generally a benefit. We already know that we're way too reliant on AI, that it's just way too much of replacing our critical thinking, and we give you all of this analysis in first as to what it is doing. I'll take you in a second. Actually, I'll take you now.
Did the Industrial Revolution make us way too reliant on machines?
No, but the Industrial Revolution was entirely different, because what it did was it encouraged us to move into other sectors that were computer-based or machine-based. So we actually had new jobs that were for machines. But the problem is that AI can literally, what is happening in the status quo is that employers are incentivized to use AI instead of workers, because they have this mentality that it is going to work better than the humans themselves. And this is just not true. Opposition themselves tell you that there are issues in ChatGPT that still needed to be sorted out. Okay, last response. We tell you that we do this better because we encourage governments to democratise this themselves. This looks like when governments make regulations, they do this in the interest of the entire population rather than just focusing on a specific subset. Okay, no thank you. Lastly, on my substantive on mitigating the environmental impacts, and note that this is directly responsive to their second substantive. 5 things here. Firstly, a lot of the AI made harms the environment, not through use, but primarily through testing and development. This is extremely intuitive. Think about how much trial and error the testing process takes. Secondly, we already tell you how regulations ease this. Even the stopping of new models being created helps this. If there's anything that you know from our first speech is that AI is growing exponentially and as are detriments to the environment. Thirdly, we encourage use of existing AI in a more efficient way because it is limited right now because it is inefficiently used and therefore has a massive impact to the environment. OpenAI literally recognizes this when they deter people from going on the site in times of heightened activity, but they're not stopping the cause of most of the environmental impacts, which is in the testing stages because they're simply not incentivized to do this. Fourthly, opposition supports increased use and integration of AI into their world. Note that they can literally never unlock this benefit no matter how much they try. Fifthly, AI is concentrated in the developed world, but most of the environmental impacts actually affect the developing world. 2 impacts. Firstly, we stop the massive wastage and use of water that exists in opposition's world. And secondly, we stop the exploitation of hardware that exacerbates the massive inequality in their world. We were extremely proud to propose.
Second negative for that.
Opposition does not stop the harms of AI, they merely just freeze it as the worst possible version of itself for society to clean up. Couple things in this speech. First, 2 responsive questions on number 1, what effectively can police the harms of AI? Number 2, what can actually reap the most societal benefits of the applications of AI? Before a substantive push on how we just get better policy and regulation, which is directly responsive to both speakers that we've heard from the affirmative. But first on this question of how we can effectively police the harms of AI. So a big question that has come up in this debate is the power imbalance in this arms race, right? I want to point out that this power imbalance does not really change on either side because even without the use of AI, the US and China and all these other global superpowers, they are still going to compete for resources. There is still a power imbalance in AI, and tech companies still exist. There are still big companies that fight for dominance, even in the status quo with the use of AI right now. But even if you don't buy that, our side still allows for more competition when you allow for this more development. As we told you at first speaker, there are still small startups, no thank you, that get more AI, and because AI is more accessible, as we told you in our democratization point, if anything, you get less power and balance on our side because at least there is more competition from these smaller startups because you make the market more accessible. I want to point out that opposition wrongly tells you that these developing countries cannot have access to this AI because
No barrier of entry. You still have things like open source AI that is available to these developing countries. Opposition ignores this fact. We highly mitigate this harm of the arms race. Now this broader question of AI being out of control. No, thank you. I think that harms still exist on your side. AI is still largely controllable in the status quo, but also in our comparative world because you literally have safeguards and laws in place to mitigate and limit the misuse of AI. This looks like the Global AI Summit. No, thank you, and the EU AI Act, where they literally implement strict rules around the uses of AI that highly mitigates the harm of AI being out of control. But even if you don't buy that right, their side still gets the worst comparative because ultimately when you prohibit the development, your safety research stops. You have less understanding of AI use. You don't get better control systems. No, thank you. And I will talk more about this into my substantive. But that is just to say that our
our policies that we have implemented in the status quo have still adapted to rapid technology. This looks like the rise of the internet, right? We had still rapid privacy laws that were in place that mitigated the control, mitigated the harms. Even if opposition tries to prove to you that AI is exponentially growing and it outpaces the legislation that we can make, there are still existing examples of how we have controlled this harm, of how it is not as bad as opposition is trying to characterize to you. I'll take you now.
The way that countries fight in your world is who has the model most likely to end the world, just like their nuclear program. How can you guys ever stop this?
Okay, listen, the nuclear programs in your world, they still exist, right? There are still mitigations in our world when you get this development, because I'll talk to you about why we get better policy in my standard. But ultimately, people had more understanding of this AI, they were making more concrete policies around it. In your world, this AI is largely speculative. People were more scared, the nuclear weapons were still being used, and I'll talk about why we just get this better benefit in better policies. So the real problem here is if we have the capacity to respond to these issues, it's not actually about how the speed of this AI is developing. Our side just gives the government this flexibility and this understanding of AI to be able to regulate it. Now on this question of how there is just misinformation and bias within AI, again, I still think this largely exists on their side, but the comparative is that your development of AI stagnated. That is to say that our side can still reap the benefits because at least it is more likely to allow these AI models to develop, right? You are more likely to get a better understanding of AI. You are more likely to have more ethical regulations around it because more people are widely adapting it. It is not stagnated in the current concentration of power that it currently is now. That is to say you could implement more guardrails that are still existing. Meta AI literally has deepfake regulations because AI is literally being used to be able to detect these kinds of misuses. That is unique to our side. No, thank you. Now on this second question of how we can reap the benefits for society, this question about job loss, right? Job loss still happens on their side because AI is still a prevalent issue. It is still displacing people and it gets worse. The difference on our world is that job opportunities, no thank you, are being made on our side when you get this development. That is to say, when you develop more AI, you introduce new industries, you introduce new services that allow for more people to integrate their transferable skills into these new jobs, so therefore people are still getting new jobs, and that just happens when your workforce also develops. Even if you don't buy that, we still make it easier for people with non-transferable skills to develop into these jobs because AI makes job skills substantially easier because the barrier to entry was less. You remove the mundane tasks that came with these jobs so people are better able to actually integrate into the workforce with AI to assist it. People can better transition on our side. The job loss was highly mitigated. Now on their second point about the environment, on the environment, I still think that harms exist on their side, right? And they are largely exaggerating this point about water usage because ultimately AI still uses large amounts of water on their side. We are willing, taking them at their best, right? We are willing to cop some harms that sure we get more water usage because at least we get this broader societal benefit of better carbon capture technology, better climate change prediction. That was largely beneficial at a larger scale, no thank you, on our side in terms of the environment. But even if you don't buy that, the difference is that at least by developing AI, we are more likely to develop more efficient models. That is to say, models that use less emission systems, models that minimizes waste. That is already happening with current models right now. And that meant that on opposition, you are freezing this AI to be this unsustainable technology that was never going to get better for the environment in the first place. Yeah, take you.
The nuance of our point on jobs was that employers believe that AI can replace jobs, but it can't. Stopping development allows people to realize that it doesn't.
Okay, I think this point about jobs largely wasn't true because when you had the development of AI, you meant that you replaced these mundane laborious jobs, but now the workforce focused on these human-centered jobs. People were more motivated to work because they knew that their skills could be used in a more human way, things that they were more passionate about, things that weren't repetitive in their skill set. I think people were more passionate to go to the workforce when they knew AI could not only make their job a lot easier and therefore their barrier to entry was a lot lower, they were more likely to be human-centered, they were more likely to feel more passion for that job in the first place. Now, how we get better policy, which is uniquely responsive to both speakers on Affirmative. Okay, I think we need to characterize that AI is currently very embedded and integrated into things like healthcare, into finance, into education. But currently, we do not have technology to actually understand the harms and risks of AI. That's to say that right now in society, AI is seen as this black box where we don't really understand the whole intricacies that AI can give us. That is why current governments are currently trying to regulate AI usage. But on Affirmative, when you stop this development, you ultimately try to regulate a frozen system. Couple reasons to why we get better policy then. Number one, developing AI literally uniquely reveals your harms. That is to say, you got to understand more risks, such as your bias and your misuse, when you develop this AI to be further integrated into society, because you got a better understanding of it, because you weren't freezing it at its current level, you were developing it, you were testing it over a course of time. The second reason then is that policymakers were able to learn from these new risks that they got with the development. That is to say that the regulations and policies that you were making for this AI had more evidence when you used it more in your society. On opposition, you literally only regulate the old harms, therefore it was more unpredictable on their side and you couldn't regulate it as much. Therefore, the impacts is that you just got better targeted regulation, because governments and policymakers needed more urgency to develop these policies in the first place, because it was still developing, because it was put into the spotlight. So you just got more public scrutiny, and therefore people were more likely to make policies around it. That is why I'm so proud to oppose.
I call the third affirmative Evie.
On side negative, risks grew exponentially while benefits grew incrementally. Protecting the agency and safety of the human race was Affirmative's greatest priority. 3 things for you then tonight. First, a weighing of risk versus benefit. Secondly, on existential threats. And thirdly, on which side got better regulation. Firstly, on risk versus benefit. When given the choice between unknown speculative benefits and preventing certain destruction, Affirmative chose the latter, and we gave you 3 reasons across the bench for this. Firstly, on extremely marginal benefits. We said that already existing AI can be refined and improved. This should be the focus in the future, on models that we already have can be further capitalized on and utilized to its full potential. AI in opposition's world focuses on things like mass surveillance, autonomous weapons, and large-scale domains that it hasn't previously dominated, which will ensure the escalation of it, as I will talk about in the next point. Secondly, workers are replaced unfairly. We said that the main thing here was that companies were incentivized to replace workers in millions, when it actually was not the most efficient thing to do because of the flaws in these models, because it was often very poorly implemented. No, thank you. There were not enough checks and balances, and they weren't regulated by humans. This created irreparable harms to the economy because of this crucial decline in white-collar entry-level jobs, which young people then found it harder to move up the career ladder and gain experience. These were not mundane, as you hear from second negative, because they were critical starting points for young people, and they were critical that a lot of vulnerable people were dependent on. Okay, thirdly, on exacerbating existing harms. We told you that deep fakes will grow in dangerous precision and dangerous uncontrollable accuracy. The world now cannot tell what is real from what is not real. This created irreversible damage. When you side with opposition, you must accept that you couldn't turn back. Once deepfakes had reached a point of sophistication where misinformation was even more rampant, along with the inability, no thank you, to distinguish truth from lies. So what did you hear from opposition tonight about their supposed benefits? Firstly, they gave you a push on access to more reliable information. 2 responses. A, there were plenty of ways people could access high quality information without advanced AI systems, without hitting paywalls, but most importantly, without using AI at all. B, the quality information didn't actually get better on their side because development simply focused on the large scale machinery rather than lower level language models, no thank you, being improved. Therefore, they couldn't claim any extra benefits on this point. Secondly, they say that they get better AI. They would rather improve AI than actually than keep AI as it is. We told you that they didn't get more actual helpful AI. They actually just got more advanced mechanisms for destruction. I'll take you.
Does AI not make more jobs easier and thus lower the barrier to entry for vulnerable people with untransferable skills?
No, because we thought that these starting level jobs were absolutely critical for vulnerable people that depended on it, but most importantly, they were critical for white collar, knowledge-based, intellectual jobs where people who didn't have a very higher education and experience couldn't just walk into a room and get a new job. They needed these lower level jobs that you refer to as mundane to actually gain that experience to be able to move up to higher positions. Okay. This point of destruction leads me into my next point, on existential threats. We told you that companies here were more incentivized to compete for warfare programs in global superpower arms races. This was because high impact technology that would be focused on in their world, in like developing AI, had more potential for profit. This this was our main response to negative symmetrization attempt on the power imbalance. We thought that because this high impact technology would be the focus on, that was where the competitiveness would come from. This meant that it was more like competitiveness in the market by creating highly detrimental shot technology like Mythos, like we've told you down the bench. For these reasons, technology was very likely to actually become existentially threatening. Firstly, it was unpredictable. You could not plan or respond to it efficiently. And secondly, corporations were incentivized, to continuously trial and error, even against the good of humanity, due to this level of competition. So what you know from this is that AI will develop to the point of what we have previously speculated. This is not no longer fantasy. This is something that would now be a reality. Okay, and then onto which side got better regulation. We told you that there was a regulation gap which would critically continue to widen on opposition side. There were a few reasons for this. No, thank you. Firstly, we told you AI could be better used if we allowed regulation the chance to actually catch up. We stopped the development of AI. It is now constant. Governments are now able to sustainably address these issues at an appropriate pace and to a sufficient and high quality level. This was because they were given the opportunity to actually slow down and to actually make the best quality response systems possible. We prevent the what if mindset where people are actually people are incentivized to support AI because of the benefits it can give them in their everyday life. We're less focused on the next big thing, and this means that we could better regulate the things that we have on our side already. I'll tell you.
Why are people more likely to support AI when you lock them in a world that freezes them with misinformation, bias, and deepfakes?
Okay, but this is completely symmetrical because we see that on either world, people use AI, people use it for their benefit. We think it was much better for the good of the people to not escalate to this to a point where there was existential threats, to the point where you weren't able to regulate it appropriately. Okay, on our side. Okay, then on better regulation of everyday harms and threats, which leads me from this POI. On opposition side, governments have way too much, they have too many things to regulate in this sphere of how AI has developed. This is because they're in a limited time frame under high pressure because of this rapid development. So naturally, what they will do is prioritize the new large-scale threats, the ones with the most high impact, the ones that were the most important because they were the most existentially threatening. They were the ones that they had to address the most. This meant they were not able to actually address or try and implement legislation for all things, no thank you, the everyday things that AI can harm in many different ways. On our side, they actually didn't need to prioritize this because we stopped AI from developing to the point where you had to choose between regulating the everyday harms over the actual existential threats. So now the government would be able to target legislation that actually affected the everyday person, the person who actually who was affected by deepfakes, the people who use ChatGPT. This mitigated the harms of existing AI. No, thank you. So we therefore got this overall better AI usage on our side. And lastly, on environmental detriment. We thought that this could not be neglected in a world verging on the point of no return due to climate change. We told you the bulk of water usage and energy usage would inevitably worsen because they were exhausted the most during rigorous experimentation processes required to create new AI. Solving climate change like they tell you with something that also makes it worse was incredibly ironic. We weigh this very highly with severity because the potential problem-solving capacity of AI in the future becomes completely futile if we no longer have a thriving planet for it to exist in. In two worlds with AI, you would rather live in the one that doesn't make it worse.
I call upon the third negative, Grace.
21st century has proved the Luddites wrong. The critical failure opposition made in this debate was to hang their case on generative AI and a dystopian Hollywood sci-fi narrative. They ignore all of the certain benefits that AI development in medicine, environment and tech entails, which we tell you about from first speaker in Narrow AI. 3 questions in this speech. Firstly on regulation, secondly on development, and thirdly on the environment. On regulation, the key clash here is essentially who gets better regulation. You know, this is particularly important for all of the benefits they want to tell us about the current existing AI that they get in their world. Okay, we hear 2 things from opposition. The first is that they are better able to implement safeguards and regulations because essentially, if AI has stopped developing, you are better able to keep up with it. But secondly, that our side necessarily leaves AI unregulated or better underregulated. Okay. The first thing to note here is that they lose the impetus and the urgency to regulate AI that we told you existed under our side but not under theirs. That is, the reason that we host so many roundtables on AI development, so many discussions on it, no thank you, is because it is an emerging and currently ongoing technology that is set to shape the world massively. Under their side, when it stagnates, you necessarily lock out that urgency that led to governments being put under impetus by their populations, and by the economic impacts to regulate this. It necessarily stagnates there.
Information.
No, thank you. And I think, secondly, then, the key thing to say here as well is that you just lose. I don't think it's the opposition then say that but you can't regulate something you don't understand. I think the key thing to say here is that once you are developing and maintaining a model, you do understand a lot of how it is working and what it is doing. We give you the example of ChatGPT that has already been developed. They tell us that this isn't relevant, but I think it is. It is what goes to show you that these companies do know what they are doing when they are selling it to different people. That is necessarily what you have to tell people when you give it to them, when they have to consume it. For that reason, we tell you that we do know what these AIs are doing. We are able to say that. No, thank you. But we can also implement regulations on the development process. That is, mandatory reporting procedures. None of that was mutually exclusive to opposition. We still had, under regulation, all of the existing privacy laws, all of those things that we could combine. But we also had the public impetus, and that was the most important thing that they got rid of when they lost this prioritization. No, thank you. But then they tell us that we can only prioritize the most existential threats due to lack of time. 1, I don't see why it is an issue to prioritize existential threats. We get more of an impetus to do that under our side than under theirs. That means we probably do get better regulation around autonomous weapon systems and things like that, which we tell you are technologies that are already existing and that they have to stand by existing in their world because they've already become widespread in defense systems. But secondly, no, thank you. We think that these governments do actually have the ability to regulate a lot of these things for the same reason that we're trying to regulate things around Grok AI and deepfakes that already exist. I just think for that reason we still are able to get better regulation than opposition, but we also critically are able to continue developing the technology in relation to that regulation. Okay, I'll take a point now, Pierre.
Does the impetus for regulation not still exist when people are being blackmailed by deepfakes?
I think just at worst, that's just symmetric under opposition because the same impetus exists under our side, but it exists to a large extent when you are continuing to develop an AI and continuing to integrate it. That's why we got more of an impetus and it became more of an issue that governments actually had to care about than they did under your side. Okay, on development, we hear 2 key things. The first from opposition is on certain harms and the second on existential destruction. On certain harms, I think it's just firstly a stretch to call all of these harms certain. We thought they were actually speculative. They kind of give you 3 key layers. Firstly, on autonomous weapon system surveillance. Secondly, on the economic harms, and thirdly, on misinformation. Under autonomous weapon systems and surveillance, the key mechanism is they tell you that these companies have an incentive, no thank you, to be competitive, and that there is an arms race that is currently ongoing. Hey, even if you didn't believe us, when we told you that there were literal examples of companies like Anthropic going out and refusing to engage with the Pentagon on this, we tell you that these companies at best have an incentive for self-preservation, but secondly, that countries also have an incentive for self-preservation. That is, we think for the same reason that even if we could, no thank you, they also have an incentive for self-regulation that was self-preservation that was particularly important, right? But thirdly, secondly, I think the critical thing to note here is that opposition just necessarily have to stand by banning all AI, whether it is good or bad. That was critical. For the same reason that even if we could ban nuclear weapons, we wouldn't necessarily ban nuclear energy, right? Opposition have to stand by getting rid of AI uses refinement and advancement in medicine, things that are absolutely critical, which we told you were certain benefits that they necessarily locked out from the population. Okay, on the economy, they tell us that, it will replace jobs, replace workers, and introduce flaws into the workplace. Okay, the first thing to say is that we just think that it actually creates more efficiency in the economy because you now create new jobs and open up jobs in other areas. We secondly also tell you that it means you're probably able to get better training and better literacy and impetus in these areas. We do not buy the fact that I think that the good analogy here is from the Industrial Revolution, previous disruptive technologies. The point is that we do adapt to them. Opposition are scared and short-sighted here because they do not understand the fact that it takes time to develop, access these things. But with regulation and all of the impetus that we tell you about under our side, we actually get this better integration into the economy and better efficiency, which was critical. Because what we told you, no thank you, uniquely, was that the jobs that exist in the future from AI are probably jobs that don't exist at the moment, right? These are going to be new industries that are necessarily created by AI. They lock us out of that with their policy of stagnation. Okay, but then, no thank you, under misinformation. First I just want to note that this is still asymmetric under their side. Even when they tell us that AI becomes disconnected from reality under our side, is indistinguishable. The point is that a lot of the AI that currently exists pretty much is under their side. They don't change that, but technically, we tell you all of the mechanisms I think we give you on better regulation, no thank you, still apply here. But thirdly, I think when you develop more AI, you also necessarily develop better identification tools, because you better develop technology, you better understand it, because you have been developing more of it. I think that still applies. Okay, secondly then, on their push then on existential destruction, I think they tell us that we necessarily have to focus on high impact technologies, which they tell us are autonomous weapon systems, surveillance systems, and those are the things we are most likely to be developing. We told you we don't necessarily think that is the case. We think there is still a massive incentive for companies to to look into cures for cancer, look into cures for climate change, which were also massive existential threats that humanity was facing. And if at worst they cared about a profit incentive, there was a massive profit incentive when everyone was affected by health, when everyone was affected by the environment. We tell you this, you cannot ignore all of the benefits of narrow AI, which they seem to not want to acknowledge in this debate. No thank you. When they want to hang the case on unlikely development of autonomous weapon systems, etc. We tell you that there are massive benefits in being able to identify cancers early that they cannot get. There are massive benefits which are currently being used in the Amazon and continue to be developed in reseeding, because AI can do it faster and more efficiently than humans. That was particularly critical, and I'm about to move on to environment. That was particularly critical when climate change was an ongoing and existential issue. I'll take your point.
So then why were the benefits you claimed more certain than the harms you created?
Okay, one, all of the harms that they tell you are speculative on the fact that we have to continue developing autonomous weapon systems. I've pretty much established it, but the reason it's certain is because we have already seen the application and the beneficial use of AI in medicine. But the point is, these continue to be trialed, continue to be refined, to become better. You necessarily have to stop that underside opposition because you stop development. These were certain benefits we told you we have already been seen, and there is a current trajectory to improve, which we told you from first speaker that they necessarily cannot stand by. On environment, the only push they tell us is that AI uses more, the key push is that AI uses more energy, uses more water, and thus exacerbates climate change. Okay, firstly, they still use AI under their side. I think that is relatively symmetric. Even when they tell you that most of it comes from development, the point is that this is not necessarily true. This is largely the same, right? 20 to 50 queries from AI on ChatGPT uses half a litre of water. They still have to stand by all of that under their side, but they necessarily don't get the benefit of developing more efficient AI, better users. But they also don't get the benefit of using AI in climate change technology, in climate change benefits, right? There are statistics and research that goes to show that the development of AI is going to reduce, and the insights we provide them are going to reduce climate change emissions by 5 to 10% by 2030. That was something that was going to develop exponentially under our side, which opposition necessarily locked us out from. Thank you.
I call upon the negative reply, Ansh.
At best in this debate, opposition kept creeping on next case until at best they wanted it, at worst they did our case, but in a slightly, even more probably just detrimentally worse way. Two themes in this debate. First on development, second on the environment. First on development, what is the characterization that we actually get from side proposition in this debate? It is that AI is a waiting existential crisis and they want to nip it in the bud as soon as possible. The scrutiny that we placed on this at first down the bench was as follows. At first, we tell you that engaging with the opportunity cost in this debate was far better than the minimal speculative harms that opposition try and give us in this debate. What did we tell you this opportunity cost looked like? Because frankly, it just didn't get sufficient response down opposition's bench. We tell you it looks like 1, curing cancer. This looks like AlphaFold, the example we give you at first, like looking at proteins and trying to use this as a way of curbing and curing cancer before it starts. Second, we tell you it looks like integrating such large supplies into the medical and engineering sphere so that you are able to create more and better technological development. We know that this is probably better than whatever that you can, the benefits that you can claim under side affirmative. The reason being, because when you don't get any technological advancement, you are likely not going to get the ecological benefits that we want you to believe that you can get by removing the development of AI. We thought that this was where opposition were incredibly short-sighted in this debate. The reason being is that when you focus solely on the environmental harms of AI at its current state, you disregard the fact that technological advancement entirely encompasses ecological efficiency. We give you this at grace when we tell you that over the long term, you are going to curb the amount of harms that AI has on the environment. You are necessarily going to make it so much better and so much more efficient for you to use in the future. This was just simply demeaning for everything that they give us here on the environment. Second, on actually what do they give us properly in terms of regulation and development. The mix that they give us to actually to curb development in the first place is as follows. First, they tell us that they want to regulate because of the arms race. That is, we thought the arms race was still symmetrical under both sides of the House. In fact, we thought the arms race was probably going to be worse under side affirmative. The reason being, because we flip everything that they give us here and we co-opt their analysis when we say that people still engage with nuclear proliferation despite the fact that we have non-proliferation treaties in the first place. We thought that when you're going to engage with autonomous weapons, you are likely going to get worse autonomous weapons under side affirmative. When you don't have the development to actually maintain them and create them in a good and stable atmosphere, you are still likely to infringe on the lives and safety of individuals. We tell you this at Grace, we tell you this at Bella, there is still no response here. Second, we tell you we respond in a couple of ways as to how we get better target regulation. That is, when you have AI that you are consistently watching, monitoring, and developing over the long term, you are going to necessarily just get better development in general. That is because you had a deep understanding of the development that was actually occurring. You could change it as you go. This was just not something that side affirmative could try and co-opt this debate. At the point at which they did, they were just infringing on our own case. It was for these reasons that they lost on their own metrics. We tell you that finally in this debate, we would likely to prioritize the best environmental policy. We would likely to prioritize the best target development policy under side negative. It is for these reasons that I was so proud to oppose. Thank you.
I call upon the affirmative reply, Gigi.
Every point criticising a deepfake, autonomous weapons and mythos from opposition is washed out in this debate because they offer literally no mechanism to solve this. The examples that they hang their case on are those that are allowed to flourish in their world. The truth is, if they wanted to say that any of our harms were speculative, their benefits were too, this loses them, the debate. Firstly, on government regulation, secondly, on acts of corporation, and thirdly, on good use of AI. Firstly, on government regulation, we give you 4 mechanisms at first as to why regulation occurs in our world. Firstly, that in their world, AI develops at a pace that governments cannot keep up with because A, their parliamentary processes are slower, and B, their technical knowledge is lacking. Secondly, that there is more political capital to focus on harms that everyday people receive from AI rather than trying to continue to the next big thing. That thirdly, there is more social capital from people to regulate the existing AI that only we use. Fourthly, that corporations' influence on governments is exercised by their new unique benefits to the nation actually decrease. They give us three main responses. Firstly, the development of AI reveals harms over time, and that is the way that we should go about policy. We give you two responses. They themselves tell us how urgent this problem is. This means that we need to address it first. Secondly, we tell you at first that these harms have already been revealed. We do not need more testing to realise that deepfakes are a problem. Secondly, they tell you that policymakers learn the risk, but I give you at second that the testing and the risk just causes at very best certain inevitable harms to the environment, at their very worst, the speculative harms that they want to impose on us. Thirdly, they tell us that you lose urgency because you are not discussing the most existential threat that they say is the most important to discuss. We tell you at first, and their own case reaffirms this, that a lot of these speculative harms clog up discussion, like pushing out the everyday harms that everyone faces from AI. In a POI, you know that there were existing harms of not being regulated out of deepfakes, of exploitation. Urgency still exists in our world. This means that we win on regulation, and we tell you that this was the most important clash because it was the only way that either side could resist the harms going on in the status quo. This fixes the main stalemate of this debate. Secondly, then, on acts of corporations. We give you at first a substantive push on why corporations have the profit incentive to create more high-yield technology over their lifetimes. They tell us a couple of things. Firstly, that corporations had ethical incentives. We give you that they did not, that even if they did, they had to weigh up the costs between ethical and between financial incentives. And thirdly, that corporations still sunk in a majority of their money into these things. They tell us that corporations still receive a bulk of their money from fixing healthcare, from fixing the environment, but we give you at second that the environment is not necessarily a popular issue that most corporations want to hang their case on. Lastly then, the good use of AI on environmental impacts. We give you that environmental impacts become better and mostly occur through the testing process, something that they literally tell you they want to increase. They tell you that through this testing process they can increase efficiency, but we give you at second that this is not where most of the harms accrue, that most of it occurs through the trial and error process that is both inevitable and profitable for these countries in this debate. This loses them the environment, this loses them the debate.